Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Thursday, December 28th. I had to look, yes. The days are all running together. My kids are home from school. I've got like a million teenagers hanging out at my house, which is cool. I love it, but I'm all confused. Didn't get an episode in yesterday because I spent the entire day going through Luis Rivera's proffer, as well as some of his testimony in the different trials that have happened since everybody was arrested starting back in 2016, making some notes, really trying to nail down a solid timeline of that day, including phone calls, things of that nature. But it's been pretty time consuming. And I also need to get an update episode. Want to stay current with things. We need to catch up on the demolition of the house where Ethan, Xana, Maddie, and Kaylee were killed, University of Idaho murders, as well as Gypsy Rose was released from prison today. She is a free woman, really for the first time in her life, and some Lori Vallow updates. So look for that soon. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to give the channel a subscribe and hit the like video. Share it with your friends if you don't mind. It's a really easy way to support the channel, and I appreciate you. Music fact of the day, Drops to Jupiter by Train. I think I've done this song fact before, but you know, I thought about this song so much over Christmas. I really struggled with grief over the holidays. I miss everybody who's gone. And this year, especially my aunt, who was only 10 years older than me, more like a sister and a bonus mom. But this song reminded me of her. Lead singer Pat Monahan revealed he wrote this song about the death of his mother. He went back to his childhood home after her death, and one morning he woke up with the words "back in the atmosphere" in his head. He was beginning a time of healing, and he started to compose the song. He said, "Loss of the most important person in my life was heavy on my mind, and the thought of what if no one ever really leaves? What if she's here but different?" The idea was, she's back here in the atmosphere. And I think that's really beautiful. It's a really good way to look at it, because I totally do not believe those who leave us ever really leave. And that's a comfort. Let's go through a little bit of an arrest timeline. It took nearly 2 years for the first arrest to happen, and that came with Sigfredo Garcia. He was arrested on May 25th of 2016. June 28th of 2016, Luis Rivera was arrested. October 1st, 2016, Katie Magbanawa was arrested. Charlie Adelson was arrested April 21st of 2022. And the latest to join the club, Donna Adelson, arrested on November 13th, just last month. She's just getting her feet wet there. Luis Rivera very quickly realized to cut a deal would be in his best interest. And so he pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 7 years in exchange for his cooperation. He's testified at every trial. And back in 2016, when he was arrested for the murder of Dan Markel, he was already in federal prison serving a 12-year sentence. Now, the sentence for Dan's murder is to be served concurrently with the federal sentence. He expects to be released between 2032 and 2033. So at Charlie's trial, Katie testified that the idea to kill Dan came from Charlie. The first time he brought it up was on Halloween of 2013. One thing I am going to do is use some of the testimony from Katie's retrial and put in here. It just tells a bigger picture, and you have two different perspectives of how things went down. You have one of the hitmen, which is Rivera, and then you have Katie, who was the middleman. So she knew everything about Charlie, to where Rivera gave us a glimpse into what happened with the failed attempt and the actual murder. I do think one thing that's really stuck out to me just in researching this case is the fact that that motion that Dan filed was still pending in the courts, where he wanted supervised visitation for Donna and his boys. You couple that with Wendy wanting to be back in Miami, and then Donna really wanting the kids and Wendy back down there. It's like a classic recipe for motive. And I just still don't think Charlie cared where these kids lived, where Wendy lived. He was living the Playboy lifestyle. He's super rich, doing his own thing. I think through the calls that are on the YouTube channel, we've seen his dedication to his mother and their toxic codependency they have. It was probably just making his mom happy while feeling very untouchable due to his status, his money, whatever it is. But Karma Bus might be a little delayed, but it always pulls up, and we're starting to see that now. People are wondering, after the new year, will we see Wendy and or Harvey be arrested? I guess we'll wait and see. If that happens, we're going live. At Charlie's trial, Katie testified that the idea to kill Dan came from Charlie. And the first time he brought that up was on Halloween in 2013. They were both attending a Halloween party and they were going to leave. He got in the car with her and asked, "Do you know anybody that can harm someone?" She said yes, but essentially just left it alone for the time being. At the time, he did not say who he wanted to have harmed, and she didn't ask. She knew that Charlie said his parents were really stressed and Wendy was having problems with her husband and also with custody of her kids. She learned later on, and she said when Sigfredo was arrested, that the person he wanted to harm was Dan Markel. She said she never knew his name before that, which kind of blew my mind. Does she not watch news? This was huge news in Florida in the months after it happened. But Charlie just referred to the person as Wendy's husband. Really sounds like Charlie kind of kept her separate from the family. She said Charlie painted a picture that Dan was just this terrible man and making his family go through a lot of custody issues with Wendy. His mom hadn't been sleeping or eating and would refer to the stress from Dan as the cause. She never told Charlie who Sigfredo was and vice versa. She referred to both of them as a friend. She said neither one really wanted to hear the other's names, and Sigfredo just didn't like Charlie because they were dating. Sigfredo, as you know, he and Katie had about a decade-long thing going on, 2 kids later, so he was a little possessive. All the while, he's got somebody too, so. Prosecutor Kappelman asked Katie if she told Sigfredo and Rivera that the murder was being done for a lady to get her kids back. Katie said she believes that information came from the envelope that Charlie gave to her to give to the hitman. She was at his house on a random night. Charlie gave her a manila envelope that was sealed. He made really clear to her, don't open it, don't look in there, leave it in your bag, give it to the hitman. He said he did not print that from his office, and also he put it in a diaper bag that she had. Charlie told Katie that he wore gloves so that his fingerprints wouldn't be on there. He also did not lick the envelope, I'm guessing to keep his DNA off. At some point, Sigfredo got the envelope out of the diaper bag, stuffed it in his pants, and left. She admits to characterizing the job for someone other than Charlie because ultimately she thought if Sigfredo knew it was for Charlie, he wouldn't do it because he wouldn't do anything to help out Charlie. She does say she thinks that maybe he knew it was someone connected to Charlie. But from October on, she said that Charlie was planting the seed in Katie's head that this needed to get done. There wasn't really a pressure as time passed, but around June or July of 2014, those are the 2 months, June, that failed attempt, and July of 2014, when the murder actually happened, he was just more adamant about the job being done. She said she never talked to any other Adelson about the hit. Charlie was the only one handing her the money. But Donna did sign checks from the Adelson Institute, even though she never worked for them. On the screen is a photo in South Beach with Katie, Wendy, and somebody else. Katie said she had only met Wendy one time prior to this at a dinner with Wendy and her boyfriend, Jeff Lacasse. The photo was taken on Father's Day, but aside from Charlie, she never had any communication with Wendy on her own. All right, so let's dive into Luis Rivera's police interviews and his testimony. At Katie Magbanawa's retrial, he said that Sigfredo approached him a few months before the murder to go with him to Tallahassee. Sigfredo didn't say what the job was, and Rivera didn't ask. October 4th, 2016 is when this videotape proffer was done. And a little ways into the interview, he gave some insight into why Sigfredo wanted to do this job. I'm sure the money was a driving force, but he also said that Katie had Sigfredo's head all messed up. He was in love with her, and he thought it was a situation where Katie was promising to maybe get back together if he did the job. He tells investigators that he had never heard of Dan Markel before the murder or anybody with the last name Adelson. He had never been to Tallahassee before the first attempt on Dan's life. Rivera said he robs drug dealers, and he thought that's what they were going to do. Now, regarding the first trip that started on June 4th in 2014, Sigfredo rented a Nissan the day they left for Tallahassee. Remember, the Nissan ended up looking similar to the car that Jeff drove, which the theory, at least by Jeff and a lot of people who followed this case, is that Wendy maybe was potentially trying to set Jeff up for Dan's murder. Sigfredo showed Rivera his gun, and the gun was a blue steel long-nosed Taurus. Rivera told Sigfredo he was crazy to use that, so Sigfredo told him to get a smaller gun. Rivera bought a .38 from someone in the neighborhood. He said he paid around $150 for it. The gun was bought the same day that Sigfredo rented that Nissan. He gave Sigfredo the gun. Sigfredo cleaned it with alcohol and a bandana so it wouldn't have Rivera's fingerprints on it. The day before they left, they went to go buy bullets. Rivera went inside and Sigfredo waited in Rivera's Mercedes. He bought 12 bullets for each gun. He explains to the agents that the gun shop sells individual bullets and you can buy 15 bullets for around $20. You can buy a single bullet if you want. Rivera said he had 2 phones on his person. He always does. Sigfredo had 1 burner phone. He thinks Katie may have had a burner phone as well on that first trip. On the second trip, she used her personal cell phone. He knew her number and saw it pop up on Sigfredo's phone. So on that first trip, they both had a gun. Rivera said he was going to keep one on him because you never know what's going to happen. He said he really didn't trust Sigfredo and he didn't know if maybe Sigfredo would turn around and kill him. So he wanted to be prepared. And the investigator stops him and says, "Wait, you grew up with him. He's not going to kill you." Rivera said that Garcia stays drugged up and he shot the Prius on the second trip. Now, that had happened obviously after this first trip when they both brought their guns, but he was using that as an example that maybe when Sigfredo is drunk or high, obviously can be a little careless. Rivera said he also thought it could be a situation where Sigfredo was worried. Maybe Rivera would snitch on him and just get him out of the way, steal all the money. When they were in the car headed to Tallahassee, Sigfredo finally told Rivera that he was going to kill someone. He had been hired to do this. And he told Rivera that he would be paid $35,000. Rivera told investigators he was asked to go because Sigfredo only trusted him and also he didn't want to go alone. You have to remember, they've been friends since they were kids, around 5 years old. So your oldest friend, I guess, if you're going to do a murder, you take them along. Let's look at the first trip. They left around 10 p.m. They each drove half the way. Sigfredo showed him a colored photo of Dan, which was the first time Rivera had ever seen Dan or heard his name. He believes that paper also had Dan's address typed on there. That came from that manila envelope we just talked about that Charlie gave to Katie. Rivera told him, "Never mind the name. I only need to see the picture." On the way to Tallahassee, they stopped at a rest area and also to get gas. Garcia paid in cash, and he said they had given him $5,000 and $2,000 of that was in his pocket. He said Sigfredo got the money from Katie, who in turn got it from the lady. Never said the name of the lady. At Charlie's trial, Rivera said that Katie got the money from the people, Wendy and the dentist, who was her brother. Katie confirmed at Charlie's trial that she got the money from Charlie. Sigfredo said he needed money because he was going out of town. So Katie would go to Charlie or she would happen to be at Charlie's house when Sigfredo would call and say he needed money. Then Charlie would give Katie money to then give to Sigfredo for expenses. Sigfredo gave Rivera $500, told him to hold on to it in case he ran out of money, meaning Sigfredo. Rivera said he knew Sigfredo would run out of money because he would spend it all on cocaine. He said at the end of the first trip, Sigfredo maybe had $600 left. He said he never heard the name of the lady who wanted her kids back, but on the way up to Tallahassee, Sigfredo told Rivera Katie was the middleman who was relaying everything between the parties. Rivera thought they should just go rob the lady since, according to Rivera, that's who was paying them for doing the hit. And Rivera said that was actually his intention. He said he didn't know Dan, had nothing against him, and asked Sigfredo why were they going to kill him. Sigfredo told him that the hit was because the lady wanted her kids back. She wants full custody because he had all the custody. This was told to Sigfredo by Katie. When asked if he was guessing about Katie telling Sigfredo this or if he knew for sure she did say, he said he knows for sure she said this. Sigfredo and Katie talked on the phone. "Hey, babe, are you sure she's going to have the money on time? Tell her don't play because we will show up at her house. Tell her she better have that money." Rivera said that Sigfredo kept telling Katie that. He also heard Katie's voice on these calls. He's known Katie for as long as her and Sigfredo have been together. At first, he said 6 or 7 years, and then he says maybe they've been together for 10. When Sigfredo and Katie were on the phone, she would tell Sigfredo to get there quickly. Make sure you do everything right. Don't do anything stupid. Look at the house. And then she told him to call her when it was done. She told Sigfredo, "Don't call me so much." He said Katie thought it would be done the first night they were there on that first trip in June. He said they drove through the night to get to Tallahassee and just really didn't know the way. He said Sigfredo was drunk, so they stopped and bought a paper map. They looked at it, threw it in the glove compartment. Rivera said that they arrived in Tallahassee between 5 and 6 a.m., but Rivera got a traffic ticket in Gainesville, Florida at 9:12 a.m. on the 4th. Gainesville is about 2.5 hours from Tallahassee, so clearly they must have got there later in the morning. They see a man that Rivera describes as a crackhead. His name is Shadrach Nobles. Garcia said he didn't have any ID on him and then asked the man to rent a hotel room for him and that he'd pay him $20 to do so. So the man rented the room for them. The hotel was a budget inn on Wadsworth at Tennessee. They stayed in the same hotel room together, never separated during that trip. The day after arriving, they see somebody selling drugs and ask for a 40 of cocaine. They kept buying from this guy that night, and they met up with him again actually the next month when they came back. Sigfredo had his number. Rivera said they had marijuana, mini bottles, beer, and he said they chilled all night, going to bed around 3 and got up at 7 a.m. Rivera said they scoped Dan out for those days they were there to see where he goes, what routes he takes. And at Charlie's trial, Rivera said that Sigfredo got out of the car, poked around Dan's property a bit. He went to the back of the house to see if anybody was inside the home. They parked at a place called Winthrop Park and waited for Dan to come out. Sigfredo told him that Dan drove a black Nissan with no tinted windows and told Rivera, "You will see him." When Dan came out, they recognized the car, decided to follow him to the preschool where he dropped the boys off. They lost him at the daycare. Rivera said when they were circling around, Dan was already gone and they couldn't find him. So they went to Hooters and drank, and then they went back to the hotel and partied. The next morning, on day 2 of them stalking Dan, he had the same routine of going to the daycare. Rivera said he didn't want to kill Dan over kids. And at Charlie's trial, Rivera said he was not going to kill Dan in front of his kids. He said he actually wanted to rob Wendy since he thought that's where the money was coming from. But Sigfredo said this job had to be done. The investigator asked, "Why were you paid so much just to be a ride along?" And then he asked, "Were you going to be the trigger man?" Rivera said at one point, Sigfredo said, "You should go in the house and kill him." The investigator asked why Sigfredo would tell him to go in and kill Dan and asked if Sigfredo maybe thought Rivera had murdered somebody in the past. Rivera said he thinks that's what Sigfredo thought. Rivera tells the investigator he's never killed anybody in his life. The investigator asked if on that first trip, Sigfredo thought Rivera was actually going to be the shooter, and Rivera said yes. But Rivera said he doesn't have the guts really to shoot somebody over kids. He said in the end, they scoped Dan out maybe a day and a half or 2 days, and Rivera told Sigfredo he didn't think this was worth it and that Sigfredo needed to think about this. Also, the plan was to kill Dan in the morning, but they lost him both times at the daycare. Ultimately, the rental car company pinged that rental car, which was supposed to be a local rental only. So when they knew that the rental car company knew they were in Tallahassee, they went back to Miami. On the way back to Miami, Sigfredo kept talking to Katie. So Rivera told him to wait, talk to her in person, quit using his phone because this is how you get caught. He also said when Sigfredo drinks, he gets really chatty. Sigfredo told Katie on the way back to Miami after that first trip that nothing had happened and they would probably come back. He told her they would follow Dan and also that when he was home, he would park in the garage so they didn't know if he was actually home or not. When they left Tallahassee that first trip, there was no date set for them to return. He said nobody questioned them about the murder not happening. He also said that he didn't think anybody other than Katie knew he was going with Sigfredo for this job. Rivera said he was worried that Katie would tell the lady that he went along. So this is kind of interesting. We're going to get into some phone call stuff here. Between May 1st and July 19th of 2014, Sigfredo and Katie's phones made contact approximately 2,700 times. That's insane. That's 79 days. And y'all, I can't do math, but if I did the math right on my iPhone, that's an average of 34 calls a day. So let's move to July 1st, just 17 days before Dan Markel was shot. At 11:47 a.m., Katie began attempting to call Sigfredo's cell phone. Over the next 5.5 hours, Katie tried to call Sigfredo approximately 48 times. 5:05 p.m., she finally makes contact with him, and the duration of that call was 6 minutes and 22 seconds. Now get this, at 5:20 p.m., just 9 minutes after hanging up with Katie, Sigfredo accidentally calls Harvey Adelson's phone and it goes to voicemail. So Katie explains this a bit at Charlie's trial. On July 1st of 2014, this same day, Sigfredo had just picked up their kids and was eating at a corner pizza place. He just happened to see Charlie was coming to pick Katie up, and Charlie had jet skis in tow. Well, he loaded up the kids and cut her and Charlie off in the back street of where she lived at the time. Sigfredo was screaming things to Katie and Charlie, but they didn't hear because their windows were up. She said that Charlie had to do a 3-point turn to kind of get away. But after that, Sigfredo was trying to contact Charlie. Sigfredo looked up what he thought was Charlie's work number in Katie's phone, and he called it. It was actually Harvey's number. It went to voicemail, and Sigfredo left a very nasty voicemail thinking it was Charlie's phone. Kappelman asked if Sigfredo knew he was doing the murder for Charlie. She said he may have had an idea, but didn't know for sure. Let's look at the second trip. Rivera testified at Katie's trial that ultimately Sigfredo called him and said that he needed to finish this job. On July 15th, Sigfredo gives Rivera $300, and then Rivera in return rents that Prius. Rivera drove on this trip. Sigfredo just kept saying, I have to do this. Rivera knew it was pressure coming from Katie. He said Katie would go cheat on him and then say, if you want me back, you have to do this job. Rivera said on the second trip, he told Sigfredo, all right, I know you're doing this for your wife. They weren't together at the time of the murder, and Sigfredo was actually kind of on again, off again with somebody whose nickname was Shrimp. He said Sigfredo was drinking a ton and was doing cocaine due to Katie having his head all messed up. At this time, Katie was living in Miami Beach. Rivera said, just for context, a week after the murder, Sigfredo and Katie got back together. So they leave for Tallahassee, arriving in the early morning hours on the 17th, which is the day before the murder. On the second trip, Sigfredo had $2,000 cash and gave Rivera $200 of that. Sigfredo ran out of money and Rivera had to give him the $200. This is something I've had people say they don't know if it really happened. Wendy denied it happened, but Rivera testified to it and also talked about it in his proffer, so we're going to put it out there. He says the day before the murder, when they were scoping out Dan's house, they see Wendy walking on the sidewalk with her boys right near Dan's house. Rivera was driving and Wendy looked at the car and he saw from his rearview mirror as they passed that she was looking at them. Now, at Charlie's trial, Rivera testified the lady gets on her phone after they passed. Rivera asked Sigfredo, what's up with this lady? Why is she looking so much? Sigfredo says, that's the lady with the kids. That's Wendy. The investigator asked him if Sigfredo already knew who Wendy was. Rivera said Sigfredo did. Rivera's like, what's she doing up here? Once they round the corner, Sigfredo calls Katie. He says, hey, what's going on? I saw the lady up here. Now, in the interview, Rivera says Sigfredo did not even have to say who the lady was, didn't have to name her. Katie told Sigfredo she's straight, she's making sure everything's fine. Katie said, make sure you get this done. This is a little confusing to me, but Rivera confirms he heard Katie say Wendy wanted to make sure they were there. But at Katie's retrial, Rivera said that Katie told him to get out of there. The lady just seen y'all. Sigfredo told him that Dan was leaving tomorrow morning, so they have to get this done tomorrow because he's leaving, and she came up to see the kids and make sure everything was all right with the kids. She also wanted to make sure they were up there and wanted to make sure she wasn't paying Sigfredo for nothing. Now, I don't know if this actually happened. I've just read a lot of people doubting it did, but I don't know. To me, I think Rivera comes across in all the interviews and all of the testimony as pretty credible. And he has a good reason to be. He got a very light sentence for what happened. And not only did he go once, he went twice, even though he says he didn't want to kill anybody for kids. But in a plea deal, if they find out you perjured yourself, well, the plea deal's off and you could be really screwed. So I think Rivera came across as credible. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think that they actually saw Wendy, or do you think not? At Charlie's trial, prosecutor Kappelman asked Rivera if they found out Dan was leaving town from a blog. This is a blog that Dan helped start, and he says yes. So Kappelman asks, what's the blog? And Rivera says, Wendy. I don't think Rivera knew what a blog was. They were trying to get in touch with the guy who had sold them the drugs before. He wasn't answering, but they happened to bump into him and asked if he could get them some stuff to get high. The man said to follow him. Well, as they're driving, Sigfredo decides he's going to play with the gun, the murder weapon, by the way. Well, it discharges in the car. Well, the car was immobilized. Rivera realized they didn't have any gas, and he couldn't figure out, like, why do we not have gas? So they pushed the car off the road into a little parking lot. The guy they met up with told them to come with him to AutoZone. Rivera said he wasn't leaving the car, but ultimately they found out he shot through the fuel line. So they had to go get something to repair that fuel line. Sigfredo and the guy went and came back from AutoZone, jacked up the car, and Sigfredo fixed the holes, and the car was running. After that, they followed the guy to a trailer park and get cocaine, and then the guy followed them back to the hotel. A side note that's very interesting is that the rental car company ultimately sold that Prius, but they never noticed the defect in the car. It was fixed. Obviously, he did a good enough job fixing it. That defect confirmed Rivera's story to investigators. Rivera was a little bit mad that Sigfredo wanted to hang out with this guy. He said he wasn't there to make friends. He said they chilled in the hotel room that night, and that guy stayed for a little bit. Rivera at one point took a photo of an owl that was outside and posted it to Instagram. Well, Katie calls Sigfredo. He needs to take that down. She asked Sigfredo, why would he do that? And you can't tell anybody where you are. Rivera said, and they talk all day long on the phone. Why are you worried about me putting up a picture on Instagram? So let's look at some calls from after midnight and see who called who, because I'm going to tell you, it really starts to come together to me when you look at these calls. So this is on the 18th, just after midnight, the day Dan is shot, 12:01 a.m. Katie calls Sigfredo. The duration of that was over 1 minute. 12:07 a.m., Charlie calls Katie for 7 minutes. 12:34 a.m., Katie calls Charlie. That was a little less than a minute. 1:02 a.m., Charlie calls Donna. There was no duration listed. Doesn't mean they didn't talk. Very possible it could have went right to voicemail. 1:03 a.m., Charlie calls Katie for 20 minutes. Jumping to 8:09 a.m., Donna calls Wendy for 35 seconds. At 8:50, Dan drops the kids off at preschool. At the same time, Rivera and Sigfredo are stalking Dan from the preschool to the gym. At 9:02 a.m., Dan calls Wendy for 1 minute. At 9:12 a.m., Charlie calls Wendy for less than a minute. At 9:12 a.m., Dan Markel arrives at the gym. 9:19 a.m., Wendy calls Charlie for 18 minutes. 9:38 a.m., Charlie calls Donna for 30 seconds. Then at 9:58, Sigfredo sends his last text before that phone is shut off until after the shooting. At 9:58, Charlie calls Katie for over 6 minutes. 10:07, Katie calls Charlie for 1 minute. 10:08, Katie calls Charlie for 9 seconds. 10:09, Charlie calls Katie for 6 minutes. At 10:38, Dan Markel is seen leaving the gym. And in a very haunting video, you see that green Prius following him out of the gym, knowing in a very short while, Dan Markel's life would be over. As we know, at 11 a.m., Dan is shot. We're going to backtrack just a second to the morning when Sigfredo and Rivera woke up. I just wanted to get those calls out because it's really revealing to me if you look at those calls before the murder, and then we got some more coming up after. But when they woke up, they went back to that Winthrop Park where they could see the entrance and exit to Dan's street. When Dan came out of his street, they followed him to the daycare, and Rivera said he was circling the building. There was a building across the street, and Rivera was going to park over there, but as they were pulling in, Dan comes out of the daycare, and then they followed him to the gym. They waited in the parking lot of the gym for around 45 minutes to an hour. And when Dan comes out of the gym and leaves, they follow him home. Rivera says he parks 3 to 4 feet away from Dan's car he was driving. Sigfredo jumps out. He said Dan was on the phone. And at Charlie's trial, Rivera said that Dan put his hands up when Sigfredo pointed the gun at him. Sigfredo shoots Dan twice, got in the car, and they left. Rivera said Sigfredo was really nervous. He put the gun under the mat on the passenger side. And then they leave Tallahassee to go back to Miami. And as you know, their car was captured on some city bus cams and traffic cams. So let's look at a timeline of the events coupled with some calls after the shooting. At 11 a.m., we know that Dan was on the phone with that staff member from the school where Wendy was looking to enroll their oldest son, Ben. At 11:01, That person texts Dan asking if he's okay. At 11:02, Dan's neighbor calls 911. At 11:06, Donna calls Charlie. It was either an attempted call or a text. At 11:22, Charlie calls Donna for 7 minutes. Now, Dan's been shot for 22 minutes, and you start to see this flurry of calls between the parties. At 11:30 a.m., Charlie calls Katie for 30 seconds. At 11:31 a.m., Charlie calls Katie for 5 minutes. 12:29, Sigfredo's phone is back online. And then at 12:30 p.m., Sigfredo calls Katie. Rivera can't remember if this is before or after they dump the gun when Sigfredo calls Katie, but he tells Katie it's done and make sure you have my money. Katie says, okay, I know. She knew it was done. Rivera said he asked Sigfredo, like, how does she know it's done so fast? He said, I don't know if Wendy is still up here. I don't know what was going on. Rivera said the whole drive he was looking in the rearview mirror, just expecting the police to find them. They were actually more than halfway back to Miami before they stopped to toss the gun. Rivera was going to stash the gun back in Miami. He said he intended to bury that gun where nobody would find it, but Sigfredo wanted to toss it, get rid of it. He said Sigfredo had been trying to take the gun apart on the way back to Miami, and Rivera was telling him he's doing it wrong. You gotta pull this out or whatever. Ultimately, they dumped the gun at a bridge that went over a river. At one point in the proffer interview, Rivera produces a drawing that he made that morning trying to figure out where the bridge was. He did go on a ride along with investigators. To my knowledge, they never found the bridge, and that weapon has never been found to this day. But Rivera said he pulled up to this bridge, and Sigfredo got out of the car, jumped the concrete and metal guardrail, and then he went into some grass. He took the gun apart, and he tossed it. He doesn't know if the gun made it to the water or not, but he said they could see the water from the car. He also thinks that Sigfredo tossed the extra 3 bullets they had in the cylinder. So they came up with 6 bullets, and that was it. You had 2 that shot Dan. You had the one that Sigfredo fired in the car. And so he tossed those extra 3 bullets into the river. Rivera had also told Sigfredo that if they were pulled over and that gun was found, he would have to take full responsibility for it because compared to his, Sigfredo had the lighter rap sheet. They drove home, never spoke about the murder again, and didn't tell anybody. When they get back to South Florida, they go to the ATM from 6:45 to 6:47. He says that he may have gone to a liquor store, and he said his credit card statement would show if he did or not. Let's look at the phone calls and the timeline for the evening that Dan was shot of July 18th, 2014. Between 6:45 and 7:47 p.m., Sigfredo and Rivera are at an ATM in Miami. 7:07, Wendy calls Donna from the police station. 7:11, Donna calls Charlie. It goes to voicemail. 2 minutes later at 7:13, Charlie calls Donna for 5 minutes and 47 seconds. At 7:36 p.m., Charlie calls Katie for 2 minutes and 49 seconds. At 7:13 p.m., Charlie calls Donna for 5 minutes and 47 seconds. Again, at 7:29 p.m., Charlie calls Donna for 6 minutes and 31 seconds. 7:36 p.m., Charlie calls Katie for 2 minutes and 49 seconds. When they got back to Rivera's house, he was arguing with Sigfredo about them not having the money. So Sigfredo calls Katie. She said not to worry about it. She would have it tomorrow morning, first thing when the sun came up. Rivera told Sigfredo, I'm going to the barbershop in the morning, and by the time I get out, that money better be around or they're going to have problems. He said, you're making me go on a mission I didn't want to do. And then at Charlie's trial, Rivera said he and Sigfredo went to a bar called Big Daddy's. Katie wasn't there. So at 8:59 p.m. on the day Dan was shot, Charlie's iCloud showed a message to Charlie from his mom saying, outside your house. Later on that evening, Katie goes over to Charlie's house. She said Charlie was acting frantic. He had a gun in his hand. He was waving it around when she got there, and he wasn't acting normal. Charlie told her Donna and Harvey had just left his residence and left money that Donna had washed. Now, at Charlie's trial, Katie testified she got the money in the morning after the murder. The money was received in a Ziploc bag that was inside of a brown bag, and the brown bag had a grocery bag over it. The money was damp, and it was stapled in $1,000 stacks right there in the corner. Just a note, she said a couple of days after getting the money, she opened the bag and saw there was mold on the money. Sigfredo told her to use a hair dryer and dry the money. Can you guys picture Donna Adelson washing some money? Oh, Lord. I can just see her with like a big thing of water in the sink and some dish detergent and her little rubber gloves washing some cash. She said that night that Charlie gave her a Xanax and they both fell asleep. Cell phone data shows Harvey and Donna in Orlando at 1:25 a.m. on the 19th. Dan passed away between midnight and 1 a.m. at that same time. Katie wakes up on the 19th, the day after the murder, and says she's got to go. Charlie told her the money was in the trunk of her car. She tries to call Sigfredo. That next morning, Rivera is at the barbershop like he said he would be. Katie called Rivera saying, I can't find Sigfredo. He wasn't answering his phone. She said, who's going to come get the money? She asked if he wanted to come get it, and he said, nope. He said he would try to find Sigfredo, so he calls Shrimp, the on-again, off-again fling of his, who said Sigfredo was there, he was drunk, and he was asleep. Rivera says to wake him up and tell him that Katie is looking for him. Rivera calls somebody he refers to as his do boy, go do this, go do that, to go pick up Sigfredo. The person takes Sigfredo to Katie's house. One thing that doesn't match up, and maybe I'm just missing something here, but at Charlie's trial, Katie said that she drove to where Rivera lived with his girlfriend and that Sigfredo popped up all of a sudden and then got in the passenger seat. While Rivera was still in the barbershop, his wife, whose name is Jessica, calls and says that Sigfredo and Katie are there and says Sigfredo gave her a bag and it's in her hand and it looks like it has a brick in it. He tells her not to touch it, don't look at it, and to tell Katie and Sigfredo not to leave. He would be on his way home. So he left without getting a haircut. When he got to his house, he said that Katie was upstairs with his wife. He says a name, so I'm assuming that they had just had a baby. Rivera takes the money out of the bag, puts it in his pocket. Rivera asked Sigfredo what he was doing that morning, and Rivera said he needed to go back to get a haircut and he was going to go to the bar. So they get to the car and Rivera asks, do I need to count the money? He looks at it, realizes the money is 30 grand. It's in $100 bills stapled in a corner with a grand in each stack. He said Sigfredo gave him extra. It ended up being 37,000 total. So Sigfredo gave Rivera 2,000 more. After they went to get a haircut and to the bar, they went to Rivera's mom's house. Her rent was over $2,000, and so he paid her rent. He went home, took a shower, and got dressed. He said he met up with some girl in a bar with Sigfredo and they all hung out together. Rivera goes home, and the next day, which would have been Sunday, July 20th of 2014, he said he slept until around noon, and around 3 or 4 p.m. he goes to see his ex-wife since school was about to start back. He gave her $5,000. He was asked where he got the money. He said not to worry about it and said, why are y'all asking? He said, just get the money and don't worry about it. Sigfredo kept the Prius for a couple of days, and Rivera said he kept telling him, like, you need to return this car. But here's the thing. Sigfredo got so drunk, he forgot where he left the Prius. Rivera found it 2 or 3 blocks from Shrimp's house on a corner. He said the car was parked by a fire hydrant. He says extinguisher, but I think he meant hydrant. He said that the car would have been towed, and then he would have had to have paid more money to get it out. Sigfredo had locked the keys inside, so Sigfredo had to call AAA to get the keys out. Rivera forked up $50 for his drunk buddy. Rivera and Sigfredo drove the Prius back to the rental place, and Rivera turns it in. He said a week later, he took money to his sister's house in an envelope and asked her to put it away for him. She put it in a closet. He said he doesn't want to keep money at his house because when his wife gets mad at him, she gets in his pockets and takes his money. He said he had stayed with his sister in the past and had a key to go in and out of that house still. He said that's about where the story ends with the money. He said about a week after the murder, he went to Hard Rock with Sigfredo. Sigfredo lost $7,000 that night. After the murder, Katie got paid, moved to a better place. Sigfredo went to live with her for a little bit, and Rivera went over once. Rivera told Sigfredo that Katie had him so messed up, and she made him do something he wasn't supposed to do, obviously referring to Dan's murder. Rivera said at some point after the murder, he was drinking, and he was just thinking about the murder, and he was getting mad. He said it was hitting him. Someone called Sigfredo to come over and calm him down. Sigfredo told Rivera just to chill out and to stop thinking about it. Rivera asked Sigfredo, how can you walk around like that when Sigfredo was the one who pulled the trigger and just act like everything's okay? Rivera said he couldn't sleep thinking about Dan and his kids, and he said it hurt him to know what they did. In Donna's probable cause affidavit, after the murder, Katie started getting significant amounts of money. She deposited over $13,000 in cash in her banking account. And in the 6 weeks after the murder, she deposited more in her account than she had the entire year leading up to the homicide. The deposits were mostly done at ATMs, and the amounts would range from $200 to $2,000. Investigators found deposits totaling over $56,000 between the murder and November of 2015. She also was driving a 2001 Lexus that once belonged to Harvey, previously was used by Charlie. On January 23rd of 2016, the title was transferred to Katie. She got a new license plate. The DMV records showed the car was sold to Katie for $1,700. I looked up last night. A 2001 Lexus is still going for anywhere between $5,000 and $11,000, depending on your options. So there's more purchases, more money where that came from. And we'll get into that in this next episode. But I think that's pretty much the summary of what happened that day. The phone calls in relation to the murders before and after really paint a picture, even though we don't know the context of those calls, but you could sort of imagine. So that's it for today. We'll do an update episode tomorrow. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.